In the fierce console wars of the early 1990s, two giants battled for supremacy in gamers' pockets. While Nintendo's Game Boy had seized the portable gaming market in 1989, Sega watched from the sidelines, plotting its counterattack. What emerged would become one of gaming's most ambitious gambles, a handheld that refused to compromise on power, color, or spectacle, even if it meant devouring batteries like candy and weighing down your backpack. This is the story of the Game Gear.
We at Sega have learned that some people are actually throwing their one-color portables away. We urge you to stop. There are still many practical uses for them. Fix a wobbly chair. Look, a cat massager. Spread cheese snacks.
We at Sega admit we may have an unfair advantage with Game Gear being a full-color portable with tons of new games. This is still no excuse. Use them to tenderize meat, or even as sunblock. Please, help save the planet.
The project began under the codename Project Mercury, starting Sega's tradition of using planet names during development. Sega CEO Hayao Nakayama made the decision to create a handheld console, while newly appointed Sega of America CEO Michael Katz chose the name Game Gear. Former Sega console hardware research and development head Hideki Sato later explained that Sega viewed the Game Boy's black and white screen as a challenge to make our own color handheld system. Engineers designed the console as essentially a portable master system, sharing much of its internal hardware to enable compatibility with that system's library through an adapter. Inside, the Game Gear housed an 8-bit Zilog Z80 processor clocked at 3.5 MHz, identical to the Master System's CPU. The system contained 8 kilobytes of RAM and 16 kilobytes of video RAM. A Texas Instruments sound chip generated stereo sound audible through headphones, though the device included only a single monaural speaker. Sega modeled the Game Gear with a shape similar to a Genesis controller, featuring curved surfaces and greater length designed to be more comfortable to hold than the Game Boy. Its horizontal layout also set it apart from Nintendo's more vertical design. The real showpiece was the display. While Nintendo's Game Boy offered only 4 shades of green on its monochrome screen, Sega's handheld featured a fully backlit color display capable of showing 32 colors at once from a palette of 4,096. The 3.2-inch screen ran at about 60 Hz with a resolution of 160 by 144 non-square pixels. A small, cold cathode fluorescent lamp provided the backlight, allowing play in dim and dark environments. This enhanced hardware came at a steep cost. Running on 6 AA batteries, the Game Gear provided only 3 to 5 hours of playtime, falling dramatically short of the Game Boy's impressive 30-plus hours on just 4 AAs. This battery consumption would become a significant source of criticism and frustration for parents. Sega responded by releasing 2 types of external rechargeable battery packs intended to lengthen playtime and reduce consumer expenses. On October 6, 1990, Sega launched the Game Gear in Japan at 19,800 yen, which comes to around $280 today. Initial sales proved strong, with 40,000 units sold in the first 2 days, 90,000 within a month, and more than 600,000 back orders accumulating. As Sega of America marketing director Robert Botch put it, there is clearly a need for a quality portable system that provides features other systems have failed to deliver. This means easy-to-view full-color graphics and exciting quality games that appeal to all ages. The console reached North America and Europe in April 1991. Priced at $150, delays meant Europe and Australia were the last regions to receive the handheld. Some importers paid up to £200 per system due to these delays. Video game distributor Virgin Mastertronic positioned the European launch price as more expensive than the Game Boy, but less expensive than the also full-color Atari Lynx. Sega's marketing strategy differed dramatically across regions. In Japan, advertisements featured Japanese women holding the handheld, taking a more reserved approach. However, worldwide advertising prominently positioned the Game Gear as the cooler alternative to the Game Boy. The 16-bit Genesis had been successfully marketed as a more mature option for players, and this attitude repeated against the Game Boy. In North America, Sega's marketing took an aggressive and often cheeky tone, directly comparing the Game Gear to Nintendo's Game Boy. Their ads used humor and attitude to suggest that Game Boy players were missing out. Most commercials ended with the iconic Imagine if commercials were this cool today.
If you were colorblind and had an IQ less than 12, then you wouldn't care which portable you had. Of course, you wouldn't care if you drank from the toilet either.
The ad campaign sparked backlash from Nintendo, which accused Sega of crossing the line and even attempted to rally protests over what it saw as an insult to disabled people. Sega of America President Tom Kalinske fired back, stating that Nintendo should spend more time improving their products and marketing rather than working on behind-the-scenes coercive activities. In the end, the controversy made headlines but had little effect on Game Gear sales. In the United Kingdom, marketing included the slogan, "To be this good takes Sega." The handheld achieved a 16% share of the UK handheld market in January 1992, increasing to 40% by December. The aggressive marketing helped Sega punch above its weight even if the Game Gear ultimately lost the battle with Nintendo's Portable. The original pack-in game was Columns, a match-3 puzzle game similar to Tetris, which Nintendo had bundled with the Game Boy at launch. Game cartridges initially ranged from $25 to $30 in the United States, housed in molded black plastic cases with rounded fronts to aid in removal. 6 titles were available at launch, with over 300 total Game Gear games eventually released. Available accessories expanded the console's capabilities dramatically. A TV tuner with a whip antenna for the cartridge slot transformed the device into a handheld television. The super-wide gear magnified the screen. The car gear adapter plugged into cigarette lighters to power the system while traveling. The gear-to-gear cable established a data connection between 2 Game Gear systems for multiplayer gaming. And the Master Gear enabled playing Master System games directly on the Portable, broadening the software pool considerably. By the end of 1993, the Game Gear had shifted 4 million units in North America alone, demonstrating genuine traction in the market. The Game Gear's software library became its proving ground, with major Sega franchises making the leap to portable form. Sonic the Hedgehog arrived on the handheld in 1991, developed by Ancient. Rather than attempting to cram the 16-bit version into weaker hardware, Ancient took what made the game appealing and tailored it to the strengths of the host platform. The Master System and Game Gear versions were practically identical, with the portable Sonic focusing more on precision platforming than the speed-obsessed Mega Drive game. Players had to search out Chaos Emeralds in the wild rather than having them awarded through special stages, adding exploration that wasn't present in the console version. Sonic received 8 major releases on the handheld throughout its lifespan. The Shinobi series found remarkable success on the portable. The GG Shinobi offered fantastic gameplay, but Shinobi 2, The Silent Fury, released in December 1992 in North America, surpassed it in every measurable way. The sequel featured better levels, improved controls, and amazing visuals, offering a truly stern challenge. Thankfully, a password system allowed players to pick up where they left off. The excellent soundtrack by Yuzo Koshiro and Motohiro Kawashima rounded off one of the finest action titles on the system. Disney provided substantial third-party support, with numerous quality titles featuring Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. Castle of Illusion, starring Mickey Mouse, released in June 1991, became one of the earliest examples and aged most gracefully. Based on the Master System game rather than its 16-bit equivalent, the gameplay remained just as appealing despite the technological gulf. Sharp visuals, responsive controls, and genuinely engaging gameplay made it one of the best platformers money could buy on the handheld. Streets of Rage 2 arrived in August 1993, representing a massive upgrade over the Game Gear version of the original. Those expecting a perfect port of the seminal Mega Drive scrolling fighter faced disappointment, as content was missing, there was no Max Thunder, and fewer levels made the cut. However, the addition of better controls and more moves to exploit made this one of the best brawlers on the system. The puzzle genre continued to thrive on the portable, and Super Columns expanded on Sega's signature Match 3 formula. Building on Jay Geertsen's original design, this enhanced sequel introduced new modes, power-ups, and strategic twists. That added depth to the familiar gem-matching gameplay, but it never matched Tetris. Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, released in December 1993, offered a westernized version of Puyo Puyo. The game removed the Mato Monogatari characters and replaced them with Sonic's arch-nemesis, Dr. Robotnik, who kidnaps the people of Beanville to turn them into his robot army. But let's be honest though, hardly anyone was playing it for the story. It was all about chasing combos and clearing the screen before it filled up. Role-playing games appeared in limited numbers, making each one precious. Defenders of Oasis, released in 1992, mixed exploration, turn-based combat, and a fantastic storyline borrowed from Arabic folktales of 1001 Nights. Shining Force, the Sword of Hajia, known in Japan as Shining Force Gaiden 2, Jashin no Mezame, launched in 1994 and represented the second game in the series to reach the handheld. Compared to the 16-bit entries in the franchise, the Sword of Hajia more than held its own, making for a fantastic portable tactical RPG with an estimated production run of 5,000 to 10,000 units. The third Game Gear outing, Final Conflict, never received a Western release, though fan-made translation patches eventually appeared. Sega created its own Castlevania clone since Konami's Vampire Slaying series hadn't come to a Sega system. Vampire Master of Darkness, released in November 1993, managed a pretty good job of imitating the famous franchise. The visuals proved moody and better than those seen in the NES Castlevania titles, while the music set the scene perfectly. The gameplay offered tricky but addictive challenges, making it a real hidden gem in Sega's 8-bit library. Gunstar Heroes, developed by M2 and released in March 1995, exceeded expectations given how demanding the original Mega Drive version was. A few compromises were inevitable. The Dice Palace stage was cut, and performance took a small hit. But overall, it stood out as an impressive and faithful port. Dynamite Headdy, which arrived in North America in September 1994, was also trimmed down for the hardware, yet still managed to capture the fast, chaotic energy that made the original so fun, ranking among the best action platformers on the handheld. Some unusual titles rounded out the library. Factory Panic, released in 1991, starred a generic child in the Western version who must utilize conveyor belts to send goods to people situated outside the factory. The Japanese version, titled Ganber Gorby, starred a parody of former Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. This fun mix of puzzling and action proved particularly well suited to the handheld. Ninja Gaiden, released in December 1991, represented an odd case. While bearing Tecmo's name, it was actually a totally original game by Sega that merely used that series as a foundation. Ryu Hayabusa's moveset remained very similar to that seen in arcade and NES outings, but the adventure diverged significantly. Sylvan Tale, released only in Japan on January 27, 1995, offered a Zelda-style action-adventure with an English-language patch later created by fans. While hardly the deepest or most demanding game of its type, attractive visuals and a soundtrack by Sayori Kobayashi made it one of the lesser-known RPGs worth discovering. Tails Adventure, released in November 1995, gave Sonic's sidekick a welcome chance to shine in a light take on the Metroidvania template. Racing games found their place as well. Sonic Drift 2, released in November 1995 in North America, improved on its predecessor in every way that mattered. Without Mode 7 technology, the sense of speed remained impressive, and everything controlled well enough to make it perhaps the best racing game on the system. Baku Baku Animal, released in 1996, represented one of the Saturn's best puzzle titles that Sega wisely ported to portable form. While it looked similar to other games of its type, the unique hook required matching falling food items with the relevant animal to remove them from play, with setting up massive chains proving incredibly addictive. Mega Man, released in October 1995 exclusively in North America, wasn't a port of the original NES game, but a new entry taking elements from the NES series and pulling them together into a single adventure. It was made by Freestyle instead of Capcom, and the game took a little getting used to. The small screen felt tight at first, but once you adjusted, it turned out to be a lot of fun. Several special edition consoles appeared during the Game Gear's lifetime. The exclusive white Sega Game Gear edition, limited to 10,000 units, was never released in stores but given exclusively to developers and those closely associated with Sega. It came bundled in a special case with a white TV tuner. The Samsung Game Gear, known as the Handy Game Boy in South Korea, was manufactured by Samsung to overcome import restrictions on Japanese consoles at the time. The Sega Game Gear Ninku console, a limited edition light blue variant based on the Japanese manga series written and illustrated by Koji Kiriyama, featured region-free compatibility with an estimated production run of 5,000 to 10,000 units. The Coca-Cola Game Gear, released in Japan, featured a vibrant red and white color scheme with Coca-Cola branding and came bundled with the game Coca-Cola Kid. The Magic Knight Rayearth edition stood out with its vibrant red design and subtle touches inspired by the anime's magical theme. The gold and diamond encrusted Game Gear was a true luxury piece, crafted by David Morris International. It featured 800 grams of gold and 46 carats of diamonds. Designed as the ultimate gift for the ultra-wealthy, it was produced in extremely limited numbers. By 1994, Sega's focus had shifted dramatically away from the portable market. The successful Genesis yielded two major peripherals, the Sega CD and the 32X, both demanding substantial resources and attention. The 32-bit Saturn console launched in 1994, marking a new era for the company. Though the Game Gear had sold 10.5 million units by March 1996, including 1.8 million in Japan, it never matched the success of its main rival, which achieved 10 times the sales. The reasons for this disparity became increasingly apparent as the 90s progressed. While the Game Gear boasted superior technology on paper, practical considerations dominated consumer choices. The handheld consumed power at an alarming rate, slurping through 6 AA batteries in just 4 hours, while the Game Boy could squeeze around 10 times that amount of playtime out of just 4. Parents grew frustrated with the constant battery purchases, and gamers found themselves tethered to wall outlets through AC adapters, defeating the purpose of portable gaming. Nintendo launched the Game Boy with a powerhouse first-party lineup that included Super Mario Land and Tetris, instantly setting a high bar. By contrast, the Game Gear's debut titles, such as Super Monaco GP and the rather uninspired Match 3 Puzzler columns, felt underwhelming in comparison. More importantly, most of the Game Gear's catalog consisted of Master System ports rather than original creations. While many of these conversions were technically impressive, they rarely delivered the fresh, inventive experiences that made Nintendo's handhelds so compelling. Third-party support for the Game Gear was also limited. With Nintendo maintaining tight control over the console market, few developers were available to produce games for Sega's platform. This reliance on ports gave the Game Gear a library that, though distinct in some ways, couldn't match the depth and diversity of the Game Boy's collection, eventually numbering more than 1,000 titles. Nintendo's release of the smaller Game Boy Pocket in 1996 delivered a devastating blow. Running on just 2 AAA batteries, this streamlined handheld reminded consumers why the original had dominated for so long. Practicality trumped spectacle. The Pokémon phenomenon, which erupted shortly afterward, cemented Nintendo's dominance in the handheld market forevermore, introducing multiplayer and sharing culture that the Game Gear's limited install base could never replicate. plans for a 16-bit 5th-generation direct successor to the Game Gear were cancelled, leaving only the Genesis Nomad, a portable version of the Genesis released in 1995. The Nomad was intended to supplement rather than replace the portable. In press coverage leading up to the Nomad's release, Sega representatives stated the company was not discontinuing the Game Gear in favor of the Nomad, claiming, "We believe the two can coexist." Sega did not officially end support for the Game Gear until 1997. When the original hardware was discontinued, third-party publisher Majesco Entertainment released a version at $30 with $15 games and 2,000 under license from Sega. New games were released, such as a port of Super Battle Tank. This machine remained compatible with all previous Game Gear games but proved incompatible with the TV tuner and some Master System adapters. The system and its re-released games were sold throughout 2000 and 2001 but were discontinued the following year. Over 10 years later, on March 2, 2011, Nintendo announced that its 3DS Virtual Console service on the Nintendo eShop would feature Game Gear games. This move brought classic Game Gear experiences to a new generation of players, preserving the legacy of Sega's ambitious handheld. On June 3, 2020, as part of the company's 60th anniversary, Sega revealed the Game Gear Micro Retro Console. Released in 4 different versions varying in color and game selection, each contained 4 separate Game Gear games. Each unit also included a headphone jack. A magnifying accessory modeled after the original system's big window accessory was included with pre-orders. A special version published by M2 and licensed by Sega shipped with a limited edition of Aleste Collection in December 2020. Including a newly developed Game Gear title, GG Aleste 3, as well as 4 other Aleste titles. Modern retro handhelds make the library shine in ways the original hardware never could, overcoming the display and battery limitations of the early 90s. Systems like the GKD Bubble, designed with clear inspiration from the Game Gear's look, and the Anbernic RG Cube, with its 1-to-1 screen ratio perfectly complementing the system's native 10:9 aspect, let today's players experience these classics with sharp visuals and stable performance, without the constant drain or blur that once defined the original experience. The Game Gear's story is a reminder that having the best tech doesn't always mean winning the market. Sega proved that color handhelds were possible and set the stage for how future portables would handle screens, comfort, and design. Its wide, curved shape became the blueprint for later devices, and the ambitious TV tuner hinted at a future where gaming and media would blend, something we wouldn't truly see again until smartphones came along decades later. Despite fierce competition, the Game Gear outlasted both the Atari Lynx and the NEC Turbo Express, claiming a solid second place in its generation. Selling around 10.5 million units might seem small next to the Game Boy's massive 118 million. But it was no small feat. For nearly 7 years, Sega gave players a real alternative in a market Nintendo otherwise ruled. And that effort still earns the Game Gear a place of respect in gaming history. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what other fascinating gaming stories you'd like me to cover next. See you next time.